A decision was made in Africa that no one saw coming. It was not Silicon Valley that triggered this change. It was not Europe that dictated the new order. It was not China that engineered the disruption. It was the heart of Africa that shook the world. A digital currency was born with no permission from outside powers. It was not tied to the IMF. It was not linked to the World Bank. It was not dependent on Western corporations. It was fully African. They called it Kajjenga. The word meant to build in Swahili. But Kajjenga was more than a name. It was a symbol of technological sovereignty. It bypassed central banks. It bypassed old systems. It connected traders from Ghana to Kenya instantly. It charged zero foreign transaction fees. It was backed by rare earth reserves. It was powered by solar infrastructure. It was secured by quantum-resistant cryptography. It did not waste energy on mining like Bitcoin. It created a proof-of-solar stake model. A farmer in Burkina Faso with solar panels became a validator. A school in Ethiopia with solar roofs secured the network. A clinic in Malawi joined the blockchain by harvesting sun power. Kajjenga turned energy into trust. It turned sunlight into security. It turned local power into global currency. This was inclusive finance. This was climate-conscious wealth creation. This was Africa rewriting the rules. But global powers were alarmed. The dollar was shaking. The euro was uneasy. The SWIFT network felt irrelevant. In Washington, meetings were called. In London, urgent memos circulated. In Brussels, warnings echoed. This threatens the stability of the current monetary order, said one European minister. But Africa stood firm. Nigeria's fintech startups pushed it forward. South Africa's developers scaled it. Kenya's innovators integrated it. Within weeks, Kajjenga entered ride-hailing apps. It entered logistics contracts. It entered remittance channels. It cut out hidden fees. It cut out dollar conversion. It cut out foreign intermediaries. The diaspora noticed. Africans in Atlanta downloaded Kajjenga wallets. Africans in Toronto used it for trade. Africans in Paris sent money home instantly. Africans in Dubai funded businesses back home. It was faster than banks. It was cheaper than Western systems. It was fairer than old remittance models. In less than 60 days, Kajjenga absorbed 11% of intra-African trade. Banks were rattled. Markets trembled. Governments grew nervous. Western media began to attack. They called Kajjenga untested. They called it unstable. They called it dangerous. Then came the first cyber attack. It was stealthy. It was coordinated. It was highly advanced. But it failed. Kajjenga's encryption held. Its validator pool stretched across 14 nations. Its network remained untouched. The attack backfired. Trust in Kajjenga surged. Influencers began promoting it. Entrepreneurs urged adoption. Celebrities said, "Drop the dollar, embrace Kajjenga." The movement spread like wildfire. Diaspora investment funds launched in Johannesburg. $1 billion was pledged in Kajjenga-backed capital. No Western bank touched it. No foreign approval was needed. It was a cultural return. It was a digital homecoming. It was a redefinition of African identity. Week after week, more nations joined. The African Continental Free Trade Area adopted it as a standard. India expressed interest. Brazil explored integration. China tested interoperability with its digital yuan. The whispers began. Is Africa leading the next financial age? Secret negotiations emerged. Argentina looked at Kajjenga. Pakistan considered it. Middle Eastern funds accumulated tokens quietly. But resistance grew darker. A founding tech startup in Senegal saw its accounts frozen. A blackout struck Nairobi's data center. Intelligence reports revealed false flag cyber events. But Kajjenga proved indestructible. Its solar validators ran in schools. They ran in mosques. They ran in cooperatives. There were too many to shut down. And then came the speech. The president of the Pan-African Monetary Alliance spoke in Addis Ababa. He looked into the camera. He declared, "The age of dependency is over." He said, "We are the world's next engine of prosperity." The world listened. Kajjenga's market cap hit $2.7 trillion. It surpassed all African fiat currencies combined. It was used for international debt repayments. It bypassed swift rails. It became undeniable, and young Africans joined the rise. They became code warriors. Teenagers built smart contracts for agriculture. A 19-year-old Sudanese girl created crop insurance on Kajjenga. University students in Zambia launched a microloan DAO. Hackathons attracted global investors. VCs from Dubai arrived. VCs from Singapore invested. Even Silicon Valley came knocking. The old world realized it was late. But Africa kept building. Satellites were launched. The AfriNet initiative funded Ujima 1. It created a decentralized mesh in space. Transactions reached villages directly. No middlemen. No firewalls. No surveillance. Africa had entered the space race. Not with billionaires, but with visionaries. Kajjenga now operated outside Earth's communication grids. It was liberation. It was unstoppable. The old guard did not accept defeat. Washington lobbyists pushed for sanctions. European leaders drafted emergency regulations. They labeled Kajjenga a cyber threat. Western banks launched divide-and-conquer tactics. They offered high-interest loans to African nations resisting Kajjenga. It was financial warfare disguised as aid. But Africa was not begging anymore. Data replaced dependency. Networks replaced permission. Trust replaced oversight. In the shadows, a new alliance formed. It was called the Digital South Compact. Nations in Latin America joined. Countries in Southeast Asia joined. States in the Middle East joined. They built Kajjenga-compatible chains. It was no longer African only. It was planetary. It was post-Western. Then came the market shock. On a quiet Tuesday, the London Stock Exchange froze. Trading halted for 90 minutes. Algorithms failed to calculate Kajjenga pairings. The British pound wobbled. In New York, traders noticed something strange. Bitcoin's price dropped. Kajjenga remained steady. It even climbed higher. Financial journalists whispered the unthinkable. Africa is the new digital center. Bloomberg released a cover story. It read, Kajjenga, the currency that refused to bow. Wall Street stopped laughing. Wall Street started investing. The transformation accelerated. Kajjenga was no longer a currency. It was a movement. It was a philosophy. It was a pulse of sovereignty. Cape Town became the site of a secret project. Beneath Table Mountain, a lab worked in silence. Engineers collaborated with philosophers. Elders worked beside youth. They built the next evolution. They called it Kajjenga Genesis. It was a self-repairing system. It was powered by artificial intelligence. The AI was not Western. It was trained on African languages. It was trained on African proverbs. It was trained on African ethics. It was rooted in oral histories. It wrote smart laws. It enforced justice. It protected identity. It resolved disputes with ancestral wisdom. It merged tradition with technology. On July 1st, 2030, it went live. The world watched in awe. In Ghana, a city opened its gates. It was called Ubuntu City. There was no president. On July 1st, 2030, it went live. The world watched in awe. In Ghana, a city opened its gates. It was called Ubuntu City. There was no president. There was no police force. There was no traditional bank. There was only code. There was only community. There was only Kajjenga. Entry required one thing: a Kajjenga ID. It was a biometric blockchain identity. It was co-managed by citizens. It was incorruptible. It was transparent. Solar drones patrolled the skies. Not for surveillance, but for energy balance. Homes adjusted electricity loads in real time. Children learned coding alongside farming. Markets ran on smart contracts. Trade was instant. Trust was built into the system. And it worked. There was no corruption. There was no bureaucracy. There were no broken promises. People engineered their own destiny. It was a living experiment. It was proof of a new order. Africa had written its own constitution in code. The satellites above amplified the message. Ujima 3 orbited silently. It sent a signal across the world. The signal said, "We are not the future. It said, "We are the now." From Wall Street to Shanghai, it was heard. From refugee camps to boardrooms, it was understood. Africa had arrived. It was not a subject. It was not a follower. It was an architect. It was a leader. The old global order trembled. The dollar monopoly weakened. The euro fractured. The IMF looked powerless. The World Bank felt irrelevant. A new map was drawn. A map where Africa was central. A map where Africa dictated rules. A map where Africa was no longer the periphery. Young Africans called themselves builders. They were no longer asking for opportunities. They were creating opportunities. They were designing networks. They were writing code. They were building futures. Hackathons became cultural festivals. Startups grew from villages to megacities. Communities invested in themselves. Diaspora capital flowed home freely. No middleman interfered. No foreign system controlled it. The Cultural Revolution was as strong as the economic one. Artists embraced Kajjenga. Musicians released albums as smart contracts. Filmmakers crowdfunded through tokenized platforms. Authors published directly on blockchain. Creativity was currency. Culture was capital. Innovation was wealth. The Western media kept trying to discredit it. They called it unsustainable. They called it unsafe. They called it ungovernable. But each attempt failed. The system proved stronger. The people proved more resilient. And the global South proved united. In Argentina, farmers used Kajjenga swaps for exports. In Pakistan, small merchants traded with African partners. In Brazil, agricultural tokens linked to food shipments flowed. The new world was born. Western institutions panicked. But their leverage was fading. For centuries, Africa had been told to wait. Now Africa said, no more. For centuries, Africa had been treated as a market. Now Africa declared itself a creator. For centuries, Africa had been mined for resources. Now Africa mined the sun. This was not aid. This was not charity. This was not dependency. This was power. And it was irreversible. The whispers grew louder. Is the West prepared for a post-dollar world? Is the global economy entering the African century? Investors shifted portfolios quietly. Funds redirected capital flows. Hedge funds hedged with Kajjenga. Sovereign wealth funds accumulated it. It became a silent reserve. It became a safe haven. It became the backbone of a new order. And then the unthinkable happened. A nation-state defaulted. But it did not default in dollars. It defaulted in Kajjenga. Debt was restructured on-chain. Contracts were honored transparently. No IMF approval was needed. No Western bailout was requested. The system proved itself on the global stage. Confidence soared. Participation doubled. Adoption accelerated. The tipping point had arrived. The old guard still fought. But every attempt made Kajjenga stronger. Every sanction created innovation. Every attack bred resilience. Every blockade built unity. Africa was no longer reacting. Africa was leading. The continent had spoken through code. And the world had no choice but to listen.